Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Animas Corporation, providing insulin delivery products for people living with diabetes and part of the One Touch family. And by Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes with the world's first continuous glucose monitoring system that sends glucose readings directly to your compatible smart device. Live life on your own terms with Dexcom. Hey, it's Stacey. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. You know that. I'm not a doctor. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, as we hear more reports about Apple getting into the diabetes business with perhaps a watch that could read glucose levels, we catch up with a woman who called on Steve Jobs a decade ago to make diabetes gear better after she looked at her pump next to her iPod.
Look at the gap between these two things. You have this insanely great little customizable, colorful, amazingly portable little device just to listen to music. And that's not nearly as important in my life as this other thing that's actually helping me keep alive and healthy. And it's very clunky and hospital-ish and, doesn't have good lights. And I'm like, the technology is obviously there to make these things better.
Amy Tenderich is the founder and editor-in-chief of DiabetesMine. She's lived with type 1 for almost 2 decades. We'll talk about DiabetesMine D-Data ExChange, which is coming up. Amy shares her story, and we'll find out what she's most excited about in the future of diabetes technology. Plus, summer is here. How about getting gear to stick well, CGMs and insets? We'll talk about that. And a follow-up on Will's Way, a community connection from 2015. It all starts now on Diabetes Connections. Welcome to another week of the show here at Diabetes Connections. We aim to educate and inspire about type 1 diabetes by sharing stories of connections from celebrities and athletes in our community, as well as the technology companies and healthcare providers that we rely on. And I also like to talk to everyday people. If you're not breaking records or biking across the country, you still have a story to tell if you're just living with type 1 diabetes. I'm Stacey Sims. My son was diagnosed 10 years ago, just before he turned 2. He's 12 now, finishing up 6th grade. I cannot believe it. So here we go. However you're listening to the podcast, I'm glad you found it. Want to let you know, though, that we do have an app now. Yeah, I've got a standalone app for Android and for Apple. You can just search your app store for Diabetes Connections, and it should pop up. Would love to get you to give me some feedback on that. Leave a review right there on the app. And, of course, the show is always available on every podcast app you can think of, on the website and on Facebook. I post it everywhere. So I'm really glad you found it, but the app is the easiest way, I think, to tell somebody else about it. You can text it right from the app to somebody else or share on your social media. So it is summertime, not officially, right? But man, I live in the South. I'm in the North Carolina, in the Charlotte area, and it's hot. It's probably hot where you live too. And that means we're all getting ready for that sticky summer weather and going to the pool, going to the ocean maybe, and diabetes gear, even if you're just sweating, can be tough to keep on your skin. So I did an episode last year at the end of the summer. I went to a local pool party for kids with type 1, and I talked to some experts as well and kind of crowdsourced all the information about how people keep CGM sites and pump insets and that kind of stuff on when they're swimming or exercising outside. Somebody even talked about hot yoga on that episode. And I wanted to bring it to your attention because it's just good crowdsourced information. I learned something from it and changed up our routine, which helped a lot. So I will link that up to this episode, and I've also linked it up on the Facebook page. Pretty easy to find. Just wanted to bring that to your attention. We have 2 years of episodes now, so if you're new to the show or you haven't gone through, please go ahead and check it out. Also on the homepage at diabetes-connections.com, there's a search box, and that I've been told is very helpful, very easy. Put a keyword in, whatever you're looking for, and the episodes that match it will pop up. So I talked a little bit in that introduction about the Apple Watch blood glucose monitoring. Now, CNBC had an article about this a little while ago. I talked about it on the show very briefly about how the holy grail in diabetes gear is monitoring blood glucose not invasively. And articles keep dripping out. Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, was spotted wearing one of these watches. And I hope it works. I hope they're working on it. I'm sure they are, because man, wouldn't that be amazing for the probably type 2 market that they're going after. But I've since talked to a few more people within the diabetes technology industry, and the feeling on this seems to be that this is definitely going to be aimed to type 2 if they can get it right. Because as you may know, the Apple Watch has problems getting blood pressure right. So can they get blood glucose right? Probably. I mean, it's Apple, and we're all used to big things. So I'll keep my fingers crossed. We'll keep watching. But what was said to me, not really off the record, but I'll call this an educated guess, was that the MARD on a watch device, and the CGM accuracy is measured by MARD. You may have heard this term thrown around. It stands for mean absolute relative difference from the value obtained from your CGM to a lab analyzer. So it's a very specific difference from what's in the lab and what's on the thing that sits on your skin. The lower the MARD, the closer the accuracy. So Dexcom currently has 9% MARD. The watch that people are talking about may have a 19% MARD. And that would be great for type 2 if you're not dosing off insulin. So I put that out there. Again, it is an educated guess that I heard from several people within the industry, but nobody's seen the Apple Watch, right? So we're not really talking about something concrete. I'm putting it out there just because I think it's interesting and I want, you to know what I know, but that's not something that is confirmed. Just interesting stuff. And one of the reasons I'm having Amy on this week is because hearing all about that Apple Watch just really reminded us all that she had written that letter 10 years ago to Apple, and kind of look where we are now. Word now from Animas, from one of our longtime sponsors, and we started using an Animas insulin pump nearly 11 years ago. It will be 11 years this July when we started pumping with Animas, and I love their products. Customer service is second to none. Animas offers a choice of insulin pumps, so you can choose the pump that best suits each individual, and in our case, family's unique needs. I love working with Animas. I am thrilled that they got on board early with this podcast and have been working with me ever since. Find out more about their products at diabetes-connections.com and click on the Animas, part of the One Touch family logo. On the website, you're also going to see, next to the sponsor logos, the Bike Beyond logo popping up. I'm so excited about this. Next week, we begin our partnership. I'm teaming up with Beyond Type 1 to talk about their amazing cross-country cycling extravaganza. Next week, we will start talking more about that and interviewing so many of the participants. They are biking from New York to California this summer, and I'll be bringing you all of their stories. So excited about this. So many great people are participating. Yes, it's a fundraiser, but also about raising awareness. So please stay tuned for much more on Bike Beyond, how you can get involved. Beyond donations, yep, they're raising money as well, but if you live nearby, you can get involved as well. So I'll link that up this week at diabetes-connections.com, and then starting next week, please listen because we'll have segments on them all summer long. I want to give you a follow-up on a community connection. We featured Will's Way almost a year and a half ago in late 2015. Now, Will's Way is a nonprofit. It's in Indiana. And what they do is they serve young people who are affected by type 1 and are underinsured. So they have insurance, but the deductibles, the copays are so large that it's really difficult for them to manage to pay for their supplies. So Will's Way provides grants. They do a durable medical equipment grant for insulin pumps and CGMs. They'll also do an emergency cash grant for families in crisis for things like insulin, test strips. I mean, we've heard these stories. It's unbelievable that this happens. But groups like Will's Way have popped up to help. Of course, Will, it is named after a young man who has type 1 diabetes. I talked to his mom. And, it's a funny thing. My mom, my parents, as you can imagine, they listen to the podcast occasionally. And my mom has really taken a shine to Will's Way. And so she tries to kind of send them a check every now and then. And it really has touched her heart. So we haven't mentioned it because, I think other people do this as well, right? We all help out where we can. But I'm sharing it because Lisa, Will's mom, sent my mom the most beautiful letter. And I don't think she knows. I don't think she knows that Arlene, I know my mother has never said anything, is my mom. So let me read this really nice letter. Dear Arlene, what an amazing surprise. Your incredibly thoughtful and generous donation to Will's Way made my week. Your donation will be going to a 17-year-old boy and his 12-year-old sister. They are both type 1 diabetics and both need Dexcom CGMs, which they will receive partly because of you. With this grant, we have awarded 55 grants and helped change 55 lives for the better. Thank you for partnering us to defeat T1D. Sincerely, Lisa. It's crazy that we have to help each other in this way, but how wonderful is it that groups like Will's Way take the time, and I know she spends her own money too, Lisa, to do this. So I'll link up Will's Way again. If you've got a group like this, or you've got a community connection you'd like to highlight, and you're not my mom, although she's always welcome too, go ahead and email me, Stacey at diabetes-connections.com. It is just a nice thing to know that we can help each other. But to do that, we need to be aware of each other. So please reach out. Let me know what's going on. I'd love to feature you, your organization, your story. My interview with Amy Tenderich from DiabetesMine coming up, but one more sponsor to tell you about, Dexcom. And when Benny was younger, he was totally out there sharing about his diabetes. He didn't mind checking, dosing in class, during sports, anywhere. But like a lot of middle school kids, he's getting more private. I was surprised to see how much the Dexcom is helping with that. Being able to discreetly check the display on his smart device or the Dexcom receiver is a lot less cumbersome than getting out all the gear to fingerstick. The Dexcom G5 mobile continuous glucose monitoring system is the first FDA-approved device to let you make treatment decisions without pricking your finger. CGM-based treatment requires finger sticks for calibration, may result in hypoglycemia if calibration not performed, or symptoms expectations do not match CGM readings. For more information, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. My guest this week is Amy Tenderich, the founder and editor-in-chief of DiabetesMine, which is full of great information. I link to it from the show all the time. You probably know that. It is one of the top health blogs around the country and around the world. And DiabetesMine is now part of Healthline Networks. Amy is also the editorial director, diabetes and patient advocacy. Amy was diagnosed with type 1 as an adult in 2003, and 10 years ago, she wrote an open letter to Steve Jobs about diabetes technology. That letter went viral and it basically led to an international crowdsourcing competition, which in turn led to the DiabetesMine D-Data ExChange. And the next one of those meetings is coming up fast on June 9th. So much to talk about. Amy, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you for the podcast. We've talked offline the last couple of years. Yours was one of the first websites I found when Benny was diagnosed in 2006. So off the bat, I want to say thank you so much. At a time when you would Google diabetes and who knows what would come up, it was so nice to have real information and well-sourced, as a reporter and a communicator, you knew what you were doing, you still do, and I'm falling all over myself here, but I just wanted to say thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. That is so nice to hear. I mean, we're, I think, 12 years into this now, and, you just think, well, I hope there's people out there who are still benefiting from this, so, we've evolved a bit over the time, too. I mean, it started out, obviously, as my personal blog, although I sort of had my journalist hat on and covered diabetes as a beat. But over the years, as you mentioned, we've grown from beyond just the citizen journalism to actually this whole advocacy campaign around improved design of diabetes devices and around getting the patient voice more integral to the process of creating new tools and technologies.
Let's start by talking about what's happening really almost next week, the DiabetesMine D-Data ExChange. What is that? What have you created here?
Okay, so let me back up and say that actually the crowdsourcing competition led to an annual event called the DiabetesMine Innovation Summit. Okay. And we started that in 2011. And the whole idea was for the first time, I believe ever, to bring together the key stakeholders in the diabetes world. So clearly the top pharma and device manufacturers, leading clinicians, obviously activated patients who are kind of running this whole thing, designers, kind of connecting Silicon Valley, if you will, the people who know how to make these great user interfaces and digital technologies together with the pharma industry and the folks who are really doing the medical R&D. And then, the patients in between saying, this is what we really need. And then we were able to get the regulators involved. So we got FDA to come join us and have this real kind of roll up your sleeves kind of forum where we started talking about how can we improve tools and care for people with diabetes so that it's a win-win for all the stakeholders. How can our groups kind of collaborate in productive ways? And that event has been going on, as I said, since 2011. It's been very successful, but we just do it once a year in the fall. And the D-Data ExChange actually grew out of that because in 2013, we kind of realized that there was this big upswing of do-it-yourself, entrepreneurs out there. A lot of them were just, parents of a child with diabetes who happened to be very technology savvy, who had realized that they can actually start creating the tools that they want themselves. They had actually reverse engineered the protocols on some of these products and started creating tools. So we thought, wow, let's give these folks a chance to get together in the same room and bring together these developers, both from the industry side and from the sort of, grassroots level, and let them talk about what's happening in this rapid change. And that just started out with literally, we thought we were bringing together like 25 people in a classroom at Stanford University across from the hall where we did our bigger event. And that first year, over 50 people showed up. We were like totally breaking the fire code there with, just this crammed room full of people. And you could tell there was a ton of energy, and it just really took off. So now we do this D-Data ExChange event twice a year. And again, bringing together all of these entrepreneurs, obviously FDA comes as well. And, basically all sort of people who are hands-on involved in creating new algorithms, new platforms, data sharing tools, any kind of app. But it's very techy, I would say. But it's a very exciting atmosphere because there's so much going on right now. And there's increasing collaboration between these patient entrepreneurs and the industry, a lot of them even getting hired by companies like Dexcom and Insulet, et cetera. So it's just been a super exciting time. So the next week event is, I think, our 7th D-Data ExChange event. And we now do that in the fall as a pre-day to the big summit. And then in June, in association with the big ADA annual conference, simply because everyone is together already, sort of a convenient way to do it. And that way, twice a year, more the way things move so quickly in technology, we thought we should meet at least twice a year.
Yeah. So this is not something that's open to the public, right? I mean, the D-Data ExChange is where, as you said, 25 or 50 people now come together. But
now it's more like 110 or something. It's still invitational only, and it's still people who are, the idea is that people who are kind of influencers, leaders, movers and shakers in this area to get together and, exchange ideas and talk. So it's not a conference with an audience. It's a forum of people who are doing important things in the diabetes world and the diabetes technology world. But if there is anyone out there who is an app creator or a developer of some sort who has feels that they have a compelling reason to be part of this group, they should contact us for sure.
Great. But I guess what I'm asking is for somebody who is the opposite of techie, for somebody like myself, should I be watching to see what news comes out of these types of meetings? I mean, what does it mean for the greater community? Are they coming up with new stuff? Is it more of, the Night Scout folks? Is it the actual big companies changing some of the workings? Just give us some
it's a little bit of all those things.
Yeah.
That's what's so exciting about it. So yes, if you watch for the hashtags DData17 and whatnot, I think the exciting thing is that, even though these are the cutting edge, early adopter, super techie types, the work that they're doing now absolutely will have an impact on the tools that the rest of us get our hands on. Obviously the artificial pancreas is coming up fast and furious. That's really exciting, but there's only a small group of people who are really going to be candidates for that. But what's exciting is that the algorithms and the tools they're developing for that are now being used in sensors and in apps and other tools that'll be for a broader swath of people with diabetes. In fact, one of our feature panels this time around is about, diabetes technology for quote unquote the other 95%. Mm-hmm. So all the other folks who, and I have to be honest, I'm not a tech, I'm a tech fangirl. That's what I call myself. I'm not super techie myself. I'm certainly not a developer. But what's exciting is that this new technology is enabling things to be more intuitive, easier to use, more engaging than ever before. And if you think about it, and this is why I pushed for things to be more Apple-esque, like Apple. Their products are so powerful and sophisticated, but they're also so easy to use, and they're also so aesthetic and fun. And that's what we want in diabetes technology, right? Things that are just intuitive. You don't have to know code. If you look at some of the older pumps, all these screens with just sort of, they look really like little computer boxes versus, you're getting a little closer to it with a Tandem that has a, colored touch screen. If you happen to be an Omnipod user, you know that it uses real language. It says, are you going to eat now? And it sort of talks to you. So, we're getting to a place where this sophisticated technology enables the tools to be actually less techy, which is great.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah. So, and then the Innovation Summit that we do in the fall is not just about, and that's the reason we started this breakout event. That one is not just about the nuts and bolts of technology. It's about just innovation overall. Like, what can we do to help people deal with diabetes in a better way, have better lives, have less burden? So we talk there about, access issues. We talk about some innovations that are very low tech, like community programs and coaching programs, mentoring programs. All sorts of things, again, that can be innovative, but they don't necessarily have to be tech tools.
You mentioned Apple devices. So let's go back and talk about your letter in 2007, which I remember this because I was thinking to myself, come on, we had just gotten, we were looking for Benny's insulin pump. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking at the time, well, I don't care what it looks like as long as it works. But then this was more about, as you said, the intuitiveness, not the cosmetics of it all. And it's so funny to look back, Amy, because I'm just going to read the first couple lines here of your letter for people who are not familiar with it. Big news this week, folks. Apple has sold its 100 millionth iPod, which gives me an idea. And then you go on about these great little MP3 players and talking about really just making a better consumer design. Tell us about writing that letter.
Well, it's kind of funny because I was also fairly newly diagnosed at the time. I was diagnosed in 2003. But my husband and I were at a bar, actually, trying to have a drink one evening, and it was kind of dimly lit. And I was fumbling around with my glucose meter, which was this sort of clunky device that didn't have a good port light. And at the same time, I had my little iPod out, my little wasabi green iPod sitting on the table. And I said to my husband, look at this, is so ridiculous. Look at the gap between these two things. You have this insanely great little customizable, colorful, amazingly portable little device just to listen to music. And that's not nearly as important in my life as this other thing that's actually helping me keep alive and healthy. And it's very clunky and hospital-ish and, doesn't have good lights. And I'm like, the technology is obviously there to make these things better. And, you can call it cosmetics, but we're not talking about lipstick here. We're talking about a user experience that is a positive one, that is easy. And when you use your glucose meter as often as most of us do in our lives, it really reduces the burden if it's easy and simple to use. And if there's a little bit of joy and a little bit of personality and actually customization that can go into it. So why does it have to go, can I pick a tone for my own, this thing's going to be beeping at me all day long, my whole entire life. Can I have a choice of how loud or what it's going to sound like? So that's sort of where the idea came from. And then we had noticed that Apple was making a big PR push about the 100 millionth sale of the 100 millionth iPod at the time. So we thought, it's just perfect timing to talk about that. So we actually wrote it as a letter, to Steve Jobs, and did not hear back directly from him. Not to be surprised, but it caused all kinds of ripples, and all sorts of people came out of the woodwork, including some folks from the Stanford Biodesign department and people from IDEO and other design groups one of them called Adaptive Path, which is a design group in San Francisco, which actually decided based on that letter that they were going to do this pro bono project trying to design a better diabetes device. And they interviewed me and about 100 other people with diabetes, and they came up with this prototype for this little thing they called the Charmer, which was it looks like a little flat USB stick. It had a color touch screen, and it had a little loop on it, so you could literally hang it on a chain around your neck like a charm. That's why they called it the Charmer. And today it wouldn't look that amazing because we've seen glucose meters that are like USB stick size, and we've seen things with touch screens, but this was like revolutionary at the time because nobody had actually designed a diabetes device like that. So those folks went around the country to all of their conferences, user design conferences and whatnot, and showed this thing off. And that got, it was sort of like a roadshow for the idea. It was really nice because they went and talked to people about it and explained where the idea came from, and more people came forward, and it just sort of, mushroomed into this big thing. And it turns out that I wasn't the only one having that thought, which is great, and again, it helped us sort of create this campaign that I do believe had some influence on the fact that industry kind of got the fire under them that they need to look more towards consumer technology, that we are not these, patients laid up in a hospital that want just some gray clunky thing. I mean, that's just not going to cut it now that people are having these active lives. So it's been an exciting journey, and, it's evolved from just focusing on these design issues to larger issues of, is the patient community really being recognized and being, is our voice being heard in terms of creating all sorts of products and services that are supposed to be helping us with our illness care, right? Yeah.
Did the Charmer stick around?
No, it never came to market in that the design firm apparently sold the IP to someone, but it was all confidential. So I'm not exactly sure who bought it, but there are obviously, if you look at the Tandem T-Slim, I mean, that's a whole pump with a touchscreen. That's very Apple-esque. If you looked at the, the mini meter that the LifeScan came out with, those colorful mini meters, and then the USB meter from Accu-Check. I mean, a lot of these things. And of course now all the apps and everything, and the fact that, Dexcom actually has the interface on the iPhone. I mean, it's just amazing. Yeah. That's where we wanted to go, and we've gotten there. So that's really exciting.
It really is amazing to look back and think about. It seems like the last few years have just had a lot of push in that direction. I mean, it hasn't gone far enough, right? I mean, we always want more, and that's okay. But it does seem like things are speeding up. But before we go forward, because I have other things to ask you about the future, go back, because you mentioned you were diagnosed in 2003. Can you share your story? I mean, how did you get diagnosed? Were you diagnosed right away with type 1, or like many adults, were you misdiagnosed?
Totally misdiagnosed. Oh. So for me, I had actually just given birth to my third child. And so I had a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and this little baby in arms. And she had been kind of sick. I have to give you a little bit of the background here. So this is why I did not recognize what was wrong with me. My baby was sick. We thought she had pneumonia. And so, I'd been up with her, and you could probably relate as a mom. I'd been up with her weeks at a time. So I was so exhausted. I was kind of walking on my knees kind of thing. And we were supposed to go on this family trip to Disneyland. And, I think back now, I drove that van from Northern California all the way down to Disneyland, which is about an 8-hour drive, like sucking down water. I was so thirsty. I couldn't see very well. My eyes were so blurry, just not feeling well at all. I'm dragging myself through a couple of days at Disneyland in like 90-degree weather, spent like hundreds of dollars on drinks, and just kept running to the bathroom, and so what happened is my husband came down to meet us, and he saw me. He hadn't seen me in a week or a few days, and he was like, "Oh my God, something is wrong with you," because I was getting emaciated, and I would wake up in the morning and I'd just be skinnier than I was the day before. And even my mom said, I didn't want to say anything because you were actually eating a lot. I was really hungry, So P.S., we get back home to the Bay Area, and my husband just absolutely threw a fit and said, "You need to go to the doctor today." So I go in. It's like the very end of the day. They said, we think we know what you have, but, go over to the hospital and get your blood sugar taken and at the lab, and we'll call you in the morning. So I go home that night, and I was just taking care of my kids, I was so exhausted. All I wanted to do was go to sleep. I had dinner, and we had dessert and the whole thing. And then the phone rings at 9:30 at night, and it was this emergency room doctor, and he said, "You need to come in right now." And I was like, no, my doctor said that she thinks I have diabetes, but she said, "We'll talk in the morning." And he's like, "No, you need to come in now." And I was arguing with him. So my husband grabs the phone, talks to the guy for 2 minutes, puts it down, says, get your purse. We're going to the hospital. And thankfully we did, because I probably would have gone into a coma at that point. My blood sugar was so high and I was so dehydrated, and just like, they could not even believe that I was standing up straight when I got there. They're like, are you all right? Do you feel nauseous? Do you feel faint? And I said, no, I'm just really tired.
Just let me sleep.
So exactly, just let me sleep. But basically I ended up in the hospital for a week. And they still didn't really want to let me go home at the end of the week, because I had lost so much weight, and I was so they had to pump me full of electrolytes and everything. But I just was like, I'm leaving. I need to go home with my kids. So it was pretty traumatic, and just, I couldn't wait to get home. And I remember just opening that door and my kids jumped all over me, and I just was so exhausted. I thought, oh my God, I want to go back to the hospital so I can rest. But the thing is, it was kind of irresponsible when I think about it now. They said, well, type 2 diabetes, because, you're mid-30s, right? So here's some pills. And, they gave me an appointment with an endocrinologist, which was like a week later or something. So, I just futzed around. I didn't know what I was doing. And then I go to see this doctor, and he's like, oh, you need to be on insulin. So he puts me on insulin. But he gives me this like mimeograph paper with these sort of guesstimates of how much insulin you should take for each meal. So bad. So it was like 4 units for breakfast and 6 for lunch. And, looking back on it now, I'm like, how did they know what I was going to eat?
Right.
Plus, I was in the full-on honeymoon period. So it turned out that I only needed like a half a unit for breakfast at that time. So what happened was I was having severe hypoglycemia like 2 and 3 times a day. And I thought I was having a nervous breakdown. Honestly, it was like something, I didn't know really what hypoglycemia was. And, I was like, oh, I don't feel well. Let me try calling my doctor. And they have you on hold, right? And you're sitting there just losing your mind. So, yeah, it was so bad. And that was really the impetus for me. I was just like, I can't live like this. I need to figure this out. I'm just going to I'm diving in. I'm going to start going to I went to Stanford, I went to UCSF to different classes, started meeting people. I was like, I need to find out what's going on. Like anyone who had type 1 diabetes, I would meet them for coffee. Yeah. I just started, and then this whole thing came up with the opportunity to start this blog. And I thought, okay, I'll just talk about what I'm going through and kind of create sort of this website that I had been looking for. Cause like you, I was like, oh my gosh, I want to talk to someone real about this. And, there's a lot of things I don't understand. And also just the emotional side of this is so unpleasant, and nobody seems to recognize how unpleasant this is. So I just started writing about it myself, and it really obviously resonated. And luckily, other people were starting these blogs, and this community came up, and of course now it's just exploded. But, it makes me sad to think that anyone who's diagnosed prior to me didn't ever even have that opportunity, because that's the hardest part, is you just feel so lost. And you just need a reality check. And most doctors, they don't have diabetes. They don't walk out of the door and close that clinic door and still have to live with it. There's only limitations to how much they can relate to what you're going through.
Had you had any experience with diabetes before you were diagnosed?
Not really. My father had type 2 diabetes, but he was diagnosed with that later in life, in the 60s. And my parents were already divorced at that point. And honestly, I was living in Europe for the time when his diabetes, he actually ended up dying early of ill cared for, which I did not know at the time. But so when I was home, he was, taking pills, and, nothing I was paying too much attention to.
Right.
But later they had him on insulin. And, now looking back on it, I'm not sure he actually was a type 2. He may have had type 1, and he just wasn't treated well. And he was having all kinds of, he had insulin shock issues and passed out behind the wheel of his car, and all kinds of stuff happened. And through that period when things got really bad, I was actually living in Europe. So my brother was the one who had to kind of deal with it. And, we didn't realize until much later how bad things actually were.
Wow. Yeah.
So, yeah.
I didn't really realize this, because as a mom of a small child with type 1, the experience is so different. As I got into this world more and talked to more adults, it's amazing how often it is misdiagnosed, or even when it's diagnosed as type 1, just not taken as seriously. But, you got a little kid. Like when my toddler was diagnosed, it was all about training and here and this and resources. And I hear so often of, 22-year-old diagnosed with type 1. Well, here, take this and go home.
They do. Yeah, totally.
It's amazing.
As an adult, they just here's your medicine, bye.
Yeah.
And, no one really explains to you how dangerous insulin actually is.
Yeah.
You can make mistakes on all day long, and it's really, really bad.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's kind of frightening. And yeah, and what I've been telling people, anyone who will listen for the last 10 years when I go to all these events and, speak, is that, a set of instructions and some medication are not nearly enough. They're not even close to enough. And I mean, there's this whole psychosocial part of it. It affects every part of your life, what you eat, how active you are, your choices for traveling, every time you leave the house. I mean, there's so many effects that are just no one really helps you with as an adult. Not to mention the fact that, this medicine that you're being given, again, is a quite dangerous substance. Mm-hmm. And you need a better sense of like, oh my gosh, I can make a big mistake with this, which no one really told me until I experienced it myself. Yeah. So there's a lot of room for improvement in diabetes care.
That's a very diplomatic way of putting it. Very nice. But you started DiabetesMine. I mean, tell us a little bit about your background. I mean, because a lot of people get type 1 and don't jump into the journalism side of it.
Well, like you, I have a background in journalism. Yeah, I actually have a undergraduate degree in journalism and master's in media studies, and I had done a variety of different things, including, it's kind of funny, I had this mixed background where I had actually done a lot of journalistic work, but also marketing and PR and high tech, and I had done some event planning and event organization as well. So it all comes into play now with what I'm doing. But at the time when I was diagnosed, I had sort of quit my full-time job, and I was doing this. I had started this little editorial services agency with a former colleague of mine where we were writing stories about technology here in the Silicon Valley. It was about consumer tech mostly. So things like location-based services on telephones, which was new at the time, like the idea that you could, look for local businesses or local restaurants on your phone. We did a lot of work for Qualcomm. I had written the whole intro about the USB technology when that first came out. Wow. Yeah, all kinds of stuff like that. So that was sort of what I was doing at the time. So the journalism part of it was just, that's my background. And so when I started doing the blog, like, it was fun because I got to have my own voice, and there was no client that was going to come in or anybody was going to come in and edit stuff. So it was, just sort of naturally from the beginning, a combination of me sort of just being my sarcastic self and telling my own experiences, and then me feeling like, I want to report on this. I want to actually write a story about this to explain it. So, and that seems to have resonated, and we still try to do that. Like, we mix it up. On any given day, you might find some snarky, funny post, but you also might find a news post, or you might find a book review, or you might find, something about poetry, or some feature story about someone who's an athlete or a celebrity. I mean, we just really try to cover all different aspects. And, I always think, like, I want people to come to DiabetesMine every day and just be surprised. Like, oh, look what they were doing today. It's a little bright spot, hopefully, in your morning to just see what's happening,
Yeah. It really, I always turn to it for the more of the breaking news. I'd love to do more of that, but with a weekly podcast, it's just, I'm balancing that. Do I want to do more shows, or should I just keep this schedule? Because as you know, with a news background, it's hard for me not to want to immediately release everything. And you all do such a nice job of that. I think it's also a great feature of print. It's the kind of thing we used to say, like, clip and save in the newspaper, when you could really get your hands into something and do the research that you all do. So kudos again. I just think you do a great job.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, we struggle with that a little bit too, just because the announcements are coming out so fast and furious now that we can't always jump on it. But what I like to say is, like, so my colleague Mike Hoskins, who does a great job, he and I, we talk about trying to bring something unique. So if a story breaks about some collaboration between diabetes companies or something that's happening in the diabetes world, even if we don't necessarily jump on it the next morning, sometimes we'll just wait a few days and see what's the community reaction. Maybe we can report on that. Like, some people, there was some conflict about this, or, try to bring some meat to the story one way or another, even if it's not like we're jumping on it the minute the announcement comes over the wire.
Yeah, definitely. From a personal standpoint, what are you looking forward to? I mean, as you said, there's so much going on right now. Is there anything in particular, technology or, bio research, as a person with type 1 and as as the editor in this capacity, what are you looking forward to?
Well, I mean, absolutely feel like the artificial pancreas, closed loop technology is just about to emerge in a big way. So I think that, we've got this do-it-yourself system, Open APS, which is certainly not for everyone. It's, it requires a lot of commitment and some skill. But I feel like we're so close to having some sort of automated insulin delivery that'll be available to a much broader swath of patients. And I'm really looking forward to having because I wear a Dexcom CGM and Omnipod right now, and the two are not really connected. And it would be so great if there was a better loop and a better automated way to connect them and have that data in one place and have them informing each other. So I feel like that's really close in an easier way, not a whole do-it-yourself, have to build it yourself way. So there's that. I mean, I think we're getting close to that kind of a loop, even if it's not completely without intervention by the user. And then obviously on the research side, I mean, there's a lot of exciting stuff happening. And I think we focus so much on cure research. And of course, we all hope for that. But at the same time, there's some really great things happening in like prevention and treatment of complications. There's also a lot of people are making a lot more efforts on the psychosocial side, coping programs, and just much more recognition that we need that kind of help. Like, I'm just really looking forward to the sort of broader view of diabetes care.
That's a great way to put it, because it's not as sexy as the technology, but man, is it so important. It's so important to talk about the mental side. And it's funny because I've talked to people about doing an episode or two with it, and everybody kind of wants to hear about it, but not too many people want to talk about it. But it's so important.
Well, there's a few leaders.
Oh, yes, there are some. No, I mean like everyday folk kind of people, people like me. Yeah, it's hard.
Well, I have to tell you, I mean, I was diagnosed, as I said, later in life. So I'm in like my mid to late 30s. I already have a third child, so I was not at all like embarrassed about, giving shots in public or after you breastfed and do all these things, right? But, I feel like for so many people that I've met who've had type 1 since they were younger, either teenagers or kids, I have rarely met someone who hasn't said that they've experienced depression. Mm-hmm. They've all said that they've gone through these bouts of serious depression because you just get so burnt out and so frustrated. And I can relate to that, even though, for me, it was a little quote unquote easier because I was already a grown up and I'd had this whole life already. But I'm starting to get to that point now where some days I'm just so done.
Yeah.
And I think that they're just no technology, no gadgets are going to really help, patients succeed if we're not in a good mental place. And that's also why it's important for these gadgets to be well designed, because as cosmetic as it may seem, quote unquote, the experience that you have interacting with that gadget that's stuck to your body and that's actually monitoring your health on a 24/7 basis is huge. I mean, if you don't like it, it makes you uncomfortable. So I'll give you my example. So I waited until the Omnipod was out to go on a pump because I did not like the idea of tubing. And I've only once in my life tried a tubed pump, and I absolutely hated it. I was miserable for like 3 days. I did not want tubes hanging off my body. I didn't like the fact that I had to hold on to it whenever I didn't have clothes on. And, or when you go to the bathroom, it's like swinging around the toilet. And I just hated it. And I took it off, put my Omnipod back on, and was like, oh, I feel so much better. My life is better. So, it makes a huge difference, right?
Yeah.
So
you've got to find what works for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely intertwined. And so it's not, for someone to just say, oh, you just want to have fun, fun colors, like, oh, that's so trivial. It doesn't mean anything. But actually it does. It means a lot. The way that you feel about these gadgets, that we, again, have to wear stuck to us. And, it's a very intimate relationship you actually have.
Are you looking forward to anything in particular for the exchange, for the DiabetesMine D-Data ExChange coming up?
Yes, absolutely. Two things. One is we have a very cool opening keynote talk, this time by an MIT professor named Eric von Hippel, and he is an expert in innovation and has just released his second book, which I believe is called Free Innovation. You can actually download it off his website. He's with MIT Sloan School of Management. The reason I'm excited about him, though, in particular, is he has actually done some case studies around the Night Scout community, and he's all about kind of this whole paradigm of innovation where there's sort of these grassroots, do-it-yourself maker community, and there's the industry and how these things are not only coexisting, but they're actually really starting to benefit each other. Mm-hmm. And, diabetes is kind of a case study for that. So he's going to talk to our group about this sort of, regulation versus, the right to have free innovation. And it should be really interesting. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. And the other thing is that this time, so each time, we look at hot themes and sort of what's going on, sort of change themes, I would say, for each of our events. And right now, we ended up splitting the program into what I'm calling the yin and yang of diabetes technology. So we are having this big forum on commercialization of the artificial pancreas. So it'll be the 4 companies that are getting closest to having an artificial pancreas or a closed loop system on the market, which is Medtronic, Bigfoot, Insulet, and Tandem, which is working with Type 0. So they're going to talk a lot about how they're integrating sort of patient feedback and into their design process and their development process, and how they're, what kind of challenges they're coming up against in getting these products to market. So that should be really interesting. And then the second forum of the day is going to be, as I said, this sort of thing about diabetes technology for the other 95%. And there we're talking with like Omada Health, which does this sort of tech-enabled, lifestyle platform that's really doing really well helping people with type 2 diabetes and with prediabetes. We're going to be talking with Abbott about their up-and-coming Abbott Libre sensor, which is kind of this sort of simpler version of continuous glucose monitoring that would be for a much broader audience probably than the existing CGMs. We're going to be talking with Sean Sane about smart insulin pen technology, which is a big up-and-coming thing. So in other words, taking these insulin pens and enabling them to actually have a data interface so you can, automatically track your dosing.
Yeah, that's great.
And your carbs and all of that. And also it's bringing this insulin, this sort of, the wizard, the automatic dosing recommendation technology that's built into pumps is actually now being brought out in these algorithms into smart pens and into apps so that people who are on shots can actually take advantage of that sort of bolus wizard capability. So there's that as well, which is exciting.
That is exciting because I'll just jump in. We took a pump break almost 2 years ago, and the hardest part about it was trying to remember or guess at the amount of insulin, on board that the pump will show you. So it's kind of to help you prevent stacking insulin. But when you're using a pen, that's much more difficult to keep track of. And it was just amazing to me that, there wasn't something easier. I remember looking for an app. And since then, I think a few have come out. And this one sounds great. That would be so helpful.
Well, so it's not just one thing. There's a number of companies that are doing that.
Oh, yeah.
Smart pen technology. But yeah, you're right. That's a really exciting, I think, up and coming area that they're trying to get these sort of bolus dose calculators available to people who are not on pumps.
Yeah.
And then, other things like the partnerships between standard fingerstick glucose meter companies and these data sharing ones. So in this case, Essentia Diabetes, which used to be Bayer, has a partnership with Gluco, and we're going to have them talk a little bit about how they're, again, trying to bring this, the power of these data capabilities and automatic logging to people who are just, who are still using fingerstick meters, which many, many people will be for a very long time. It's how can we utilize the capabilities of technology that we have now to, create tools, again, that are not necessarily the super whiz-bang stuff for only the very cutting edge folks, but, for a much broader kind of population of people with diabetes.
Yeah, that makes sense. Before I let you go, I'm curious, you had mentioned at the very beginning of this interview, when you were diagnosed, you had 3 little kids who I would think they're all teenagers now. How's everybody doing?
Yeah, funny you should mention that. We just had last night we had this big party for my 2 older girls just turned 20 and 18.
Wow.
So old. Okay. And then I have a 14-year-old who is a freshman in high school this year.
Wow.
So 2 older ones going off to college. And yeah, it's really amazing to see your little people that you made turning into like their own adults with their own, not only personality, interests, everything, But I always say, some people will worry about, their kids, like, what is it going to do to them? Having a parent who's dealing with this chronic illness and they're going to have to see all of these things. And I think it's been a great advantage for my kids. I think they're super aware of, allergies and issues, and they see more than I do. When we go out, sometimes they'll say, Mom, did you see that woman has an insulin pen? I never see it. So I was like, really? Where? They're definitely really sensitive to that, and they talk a lot about food choices too, because I think I also have gluten intolerance, which came about 7 weeks after the diabetes, which is a whole story unto itself. But, I think my kids are aware that our diet, what we eat in our house, is not what everybody eats, right? And that we cook a lot of fresh food, and that we're really conscious about making those choices of snacks and I'm just glad to see that they're going to be taking that with them. It's really good.
Wow. That's great to hear. And I have to ask, I may edit this part out, Amy. I'm just curious. I have to ask, you said gluten intolerance. Is that not the same as celiac? Are you differentiating there purposefully?
Yes. So what happened to me is about 7 weeks after I was diagnosed with diabetes, I woke up one morning with this horrific rash on my stomach, and it was moving around, and it was like, oh my God. So I went to the dermatologist, and they laughed at me and said, you have hives. You need to go see an allergy specialist. But, they said, have you done anything different lately in your life? Yeah. I kind of completely changed my diet. I'm taking all these new medications. At the time I was on pills and different insulins. And so P.S. I go to see this doctor, and nobody knew anything at the time. Nobody knew anything. I'm telling you, 6 months of driving all over the Bay Area, seeing all these specialists, different allergy. No one mentioned anything. And then finally I was online. It's looking at it was a forum for parents of kids with type 1. And they were talking about how common it is that, kids with type 1 have celiac or, can't tolerate gluten. And I thought, maybe that's what's wrong with me. So I experimented with it. And as soon as I got really serious and cut the gluten out, all the hives and the stomach discomfort all went away. But, meanwhile, I'm seeing this allergist, and I said, I need to know. And he said, well, we can tell from the test that you have a severe wheat allergy. He said, do you really want to have the biopsy for the celiac? It's uncomfortable, and the treatment is the same. But it seems to me that I'm just have a severe wheat allergy, because people with real celiac literally cannot eat something that was prepared in, a pot or in a pan that had, they're super hypersensitive, in other words.
Right.
They can't even have a toaster in the kitchen that had crumbs from, something with gluten. Otherwise they already get, sick.
Right.
And I'm not like that. But if I eat a piece of regular bread or something, believe me, I will have hives for months at a time. It just turns it on. And yes, and also my stomach gets all upset and stuff. But they told me, they're defining it as a severe wheat allergy. But it kind of doesn't, other than not being hypersensitive, it's basically the same lifestyle. You just don't eat stuff with wheat or gluten in it, for example, with celiac kids, they have to be careful. Some candies are wrapped in these wrappers that have gluten traces on them or something. I don't need to worry about that. Thank God.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm fine. I just can't eat normal bread or pasta or something, or anything with flour in it, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Good times. Fun.
So fun. So that's more fussy sometimes than diabetes, just because restaurants are so hard to navigate. It's just so bad.
Oh, it's got to be so difficult. I thought a few years ago, I thought my daughter might have a gluten sensitivity or celiac, and it was something completely different, and she's fine. But I remember thinking, you think these crazy thoughts, because you always have to think as a parent, well, what's worse? Or I don't know why our brains go that way. But I just kept thinking, gosh, diabetes seems easier. Type 1 diabetes seems easier than celiac. And I have no idea, and I don't know if it's healthy to think that way, but that's where my brain went.
Well, it's, I don't know if I would say easier, because, it's just.
Right, it's nothing's easy.
What's more complicated for your food choices, that's for sure, especially when you're out and about, and because, flour is in and on everything.
Yes.
So it makes it because with type 1, you can sort of eat, quote unquote, whatever you want as long as you cover it, right?
Yeah,
and the difficult thing is you're out somewhere having a low, and the only thing they have is pastries,
Right.
I mean, that's happened to me, where I'm okay, I can be sick or sicker,
Yes.
So, and just going to restaurants, and how it is, I assume it's the same on the East Coast, but California restaurants have, 20 pages of choices, and there's 4 things, maybe 3 things on there that I can eat,
Yes.
It really gets to you sometimes,
Oh, I can imagine. It's very
hard.
Difficult. But
or you try to order something and you ask for them to, make it a little bit different or hold the croutons or whatever, and, people, it doesn't always work out.
Right. Well, because a lot of people think that gluten-free is a fun choice. They don't really understand.
Well, and it's so trendy right now.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I'm grateful for that, because obviously it means there's more choices of, products. But what I just find it hard to believe that anyone would put themselves through that. And I also think there's a lot of misinformation. People think they're going on a diet.
Right.
It's so healthy. And I can eat more of that stuff because it's gluten-free. And I'm no, you're carving up like crazy. It's so the pasta and the bread is made out of stuff that's even more sugary because it's typically made from like rice flour, potato flour. Like there's no diet component to it. You're not going to lose weight.
Wow.
It's just a substitute, and in some ways not even the best substitute, because if you're able to eat whole grains, you get a lot more fiber than you do with most gluten-free stuff. It's fiberless.
Wow.
And why would you do that to yourself? It's a biblical curse. I mean, I just don't understand anyone who, and I've been out with some of my daughter's friends, and they're like, oh, I'm, trying to lose weight for my trip. I'm gluten-free. And I think, oh God, we just look at each other and don't say anything.
Amy, before I let you go, you've been dealing with this since the early 2000s. You've written so many columns, and I'm sure you've talked to so many people. Do you have anything that you'd like to say to newly diagnosed families or adults, or really just any advice that you'd like to give the community?
Well, okay, good that you asked. So I was on a panel at the Santa Clara TCOID event about a month ago, and the core question was sort of, what's your diabetes management philosophy? So I said something that made people laugh, but I mean it from the bottom of my heart. My philosophy is to do just as much as I can to sort of stay in decent control without going insane.
I love that.
I said to people, that sounds lazy, but what I'm really saying is, like, you can't do everything perfect all the time. You can drive yourself crazy. You can beat yourself up on a daily basis. So I basically, I'm trying to coast as much as I can. My life is super busy. I have so many responsibilities, and so, I make little mistakes, but I try to do kind of the minimum amount of work to make sure that I'm not getting really out of control and not go crazy about it. And I think that parents need to hear that too, because sometimes parents, obviously they're very concerned about a small child and they get really, really worked up and they put a lot of pressure. And at some point you need to just take a deep breath, especially as your child starts to become more independent, and just be able to say, just do as much as you can to stay in a decent control without going crazy.
I love it. I hope we can do that. That sounds really nice. That's great. Amy, thank you so much for joining me.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
More information on Amy and DiabetesMine and the D-Data ExChange and everything we talked about at diabetes-connections.com. Helpful links are right there under every episode. And I will also link up her letter to Steve Jobs. You really should read that. It's hard to believe it has been a decade. And as we said, a lot has changed, but not enough. So we will keep pushing. So much good stuff coming up. I'm excited to get started on the next couple of weeks. Friends for Life, big conference coming up in July. I'm giving the closing keynote there. I'm thrilled about that and frankly a little bit nervous. So if you're going to that conference, I look forward to seeing you. But if you're not, I'll be bringing you lots of the sights and sounds from the conference. I love doing that. It's just so interesting to talk to different people who go to these conferences and then bring that to you. Also, next week, of course, Bike Beyond. That kicks off in just a couple of days, and I'll be bringing you our first episode from this incredible cycling event next week. So please stay tuned for that, and then I'll be bringing you the voices of so many of the participants traveling by bike from the East Coast to the West Coast all summer long. And we'll be covering them until they make it to California, and then to give you the aftermath and the excitement that goes along with it. As always, please share this show with anybody you think who might be interested. If you're listening on the app, those 3 little lines in the upper left-hand corner, click on those. You can text the episode. You can share it on social media. You can reach out to me directly from the app. If you're listening online or through social media, share it that way. And if you're signed up for the newsletter, which is really easy to do, just visit the homepage, diabetes-connections.com. You can email that newsletter and to whoever you want, and they will never miss an episode either. Thank you so much for listening. I so appreciate you. I'm Stacey Sims, and I'll see you back here next week.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.